Right, welcome everyone to Q2 Conservatives. It's a platform of the Conservative Party. We are an affiliate group and we provide a platform for people aged 25 to 49, so basically young professionals and young families. And during the next 4 weeks before the general election, we are going to talk about policies that would help young professionals and young families and see how different parties address those issues. So tonight we are going to talk about the issue of housing, which many people have brought to my attention, that's what the priority for many of families and young professionals. But we are going to now introduce various speakers that we have today. So just go around the room asking each person to introduce it. It'll just take 30 seconds to introduce yourselves. And I've got to also say that we tried to go live today, but there was a technical problem with Facebook and YouTube. So this is pre-recorded, and then for next week, we will hopefully go live, and then you can have comments and questions for us. So if I could ask Gloria perhaps to introduce yourself, and then we go around the room.
Sure. Gloria Croxall. I am standing as a candidate for Leighton and Wanstead. In terms of any police work that I do, I am a chair for the Wickham CPF Policy Forum. And I've been leading debates probably similar to this format, where we get input as to different areas that people are concerned with and what we would like either in the manifesto or for the Prime Minister to take into consideration. I work mostly with Steve Baker in Wickham. I live in China in Oxfordshire.
Thank you so much. If I can ask Louise to introduce herself.
Hello, so I didn't know if I was the only Louise in the meeting. So yes, Louise Harvey-Quirk, I'm the candidate in Canterbury, which is a opposition held seat at the moment. I work in education, that's my day job. I work at one of the 2 universities that we have here in Canterbury. Two of the issues that we have locally is housing. Absolutely. The local council has just been taken over, was previously a council that was held by the Conservatives. It's now held by a Labour Liberal coalition. They're putting through a disastrous local plan that's going to impact us in a massive way. But also locally in Canterbury, the community is very pro-trans rights, and the current Labour MP is not. So she's not very popular in Canterbury at the moment, which is obviously brilliant for me. But this meeting is going to be fantastic. So I look forward to speaking with you all.
Thank you so much, Louise. And we've got 2 of our National Executive Committee members, Niha and Janelia. If you can both, after we start with Niha, to introduce yourself. Amazing.
So my name is Neha Menon. I'm also on the approved candidates list, although I decided not to stand this year for various reasons. As Atia said, I am in the National Executive Committee, and I'm also the co-director of policy for Q2 Conservatives. I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say today and hopefully have a constructive discussion about housing today.
Great. Thank you. Janelia, if you would like to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Janela. I'm a regional chair Eastern in Q2 Conservatives. I'm really happy to meet you all today. My interests lie in different parts of life. I'm IT consultant myself, but I'm interested in property and have invested in the past and planning to invest again at some stage, and art is like out of my hobbies side of things. But yeah, that's me. Looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Brilliant, thank you. Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, hello, Stephen Pontin, former councillor at Epsom and Newell, living in Epsom and Newell, and active in the local Conservative association, and property owner, for quite some years now, but I think this is a really, really important, vital issue that our party must address. And by the way, I'm not, I don't consider myself a speaker, but just, I'm happy to participate if anyone wants to listen.
Thank you very much. So we've heard that housing is an issue for the young people. So people who just graduate, want to start a family, or the young professionals, the income may be an issue. And I've heard from many people that they find it difficult to purchase a house, secure a mortgage. And even if when they do, there are various other issues like interest on mortgages. Other issues that have come to my attention, like household multiple occupancy and how those have affected areas and small villages as well, and affected harassment and safety and security for various families. But I want to open this question to the floor, that what do you think the Conservative government has provided to date in terms of addressing the issue of housing? And what do you think we should do going forward? Who wants to start first?
I could give it a shot. I can give it a shot. Most of my friends benefited from help to buy, where I don't know how it works 100%, but paying only 5% and the government chipping in with the other 5%, and in good time you pay the government back. But paying 5% only was very helpful for them because they couldn't raise the 10%. And I believe that that was a Conservative policy.
Yeah, I can probably add another one, lifetime ISAs and the ability to use them, save in the lifetime ISA and have a government top up of 25% to uplift towards the deposit of the house. That's been on the radar of a few of my friends of a similar age group, and it's been a massive help to get on the property ladder. And another one I can think of is probably permitted development rights, even though it's a bit of a controversial policy in some of the overdeveloped areas, but it still helped to deliver more homes across the UK, converting that commercial empty offices and buildings and shops and things like that into places that people can call home.
Anyone?
Can I go?
Yeah, please. Yes.
Is that okay? So in terms of housing, I would say the best thing the Conservatives have ever delivered is the right to buy. I think that's absolutely our flagship policy, and it's helped thousands of people, including myself and my grandmother, who was in council housing, to get on the property ladder. And I think that's something that we as Conservatives should remain incredibly proud of. But something that I would like us to look at sort of going forward is in terms of our larger strategic developments that we do, particularly with local councils at local level, is central government needs to ensure we're using up-to-date data. So at the moment, local authorities, I know in Kent, I'm not too sure about elsewhere, but they're using the census 2014 data, which is obviously out of date. So here we're getting housing that we don't need. We're also not getting the right mix of housing. So I would like to see locally, again, I'm not too sure elsewhere, but here I would like to see a better mix, and I would like to see more homes for younger people, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom houses rather than 3, 4, 5-bedroom houses. Because I think that at the moment is not what we are delivering on. So that's what I would like to aspire to achieve.
And Neha, you want to also
Yes, I was just going to say, in terms of the situation in London where I am, we've got a massive housing shortage at the moment, not helped, of course, by our mayor. But you know, we've definitely, if you live in a greenbelt area like I do in the outskirts of London, housing is a problem. It's not always, you know, when planning is put in, it's not always agreed. There's always somebody who will have an objection to it, even though it's done probably with the best of intentions. And in terms of things like stamp duty, where I live, the average home is £650,000. So it doesn't help somebody within our age range. So I think more needs to be done to sort of make more equal footing to, and in certain regional areas, make sure that the stamp duty limit is sort of applied to London and more metropolitan areas to reflect the cost of average housing.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Yes. Mm-hmm. Lower tax for those. Stephen.
Yes. Just in addition to the points that have already been made very well, at one time the Conservative government did something called MIRAS, which was mortgage interest tax relief. So you effectively got a tax rebate on your mortgage payments, because it was seen that it was good to help first-time buyers, particularly get people on the housing ladder. And at the time, it worked very well, and it was a great help. But of course, it may not necessarily work quite the same now if you were to roll out that scheme, because you'd have to deal with the supply side of housing, and as we've highlighted already, that we know that there is a shortage of homes. It's something we were discussing earlier with our group of students who'd come to help us in the campaign earlier, and the one thing that has been discussed in our party is reforming the Town and Country Planning Act to make it more relevant and more and basically to enable homes to be built quicker, and in a way that benefits the community rather than something that is often imposed upon communities, and then you get problems starting and trouble in getting planning applications through, and it just takes far too long, and it doesn't really help. It doesn't really work for anybody at the moment. So
that's a great point. I mean, I read somewhere that according to one estimate, we need about 340,000 new homes supplied in England and Wales each year. And out of those, about 145,000 need to be affordable. Now, I know that our government committed to building more homes, but do you think we should have a target for the number of new homes that are built in each area at all? Should we have a minimum number of homes appointed, like flats and houses as well, not just flats? I think we need more of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom flats, but also family houses with like 3 or 4 for those with the younger children. Do we need to have a target, not just a target, but a minimum amount that should be built in each area, or is that putting too much pressure on local authorities and communities?
I would say I was a councillor. I lost my seat last year in the local election, but previously before that I sat on the planning committee, and our council was in presumption. We hadn't delivered the right amount of housing, I think predominantly probably because of COVID, and also we had an issue with one of our nature reserves locally, in that the developments were causing, and you'll have to excuse me because I'm really not an expert on nutrient neutrality in any way, shape or form, but there was an issue there, and we had to come up with a way to implement wastewater treatment plants on each development to allow developments to go through. So now all of the developments above a certain size in Canterbury have wastewater treatment plants on them. So it's been really difficult in Canterbury to deliver homes because of COVID and because of the other issue with Stodmarsh. And the council went into presumption, and we were putting through every horrible development in order to make those numbers to meet those targets, or else the council would incur significant costs. The problem with doing that is then you get the wrong housing mix, and it doesn't go in the right place, and it doesn't build communities. If anything, it just damages the communities that are already there. So I do think that we need to aim towards a target, but in terms of what's happening to the local authorities, if they don't meet that target, I think the other side of the argument is that when they go into presumption, that's disastrous for the local authority and then on the communities as well, I would say.
Thank you. Anyone else on this? Okay, sure.
Sorry.
I agree with you. Oh yes, Neha, you coming?
Yeah, I was going to say that you get into dangerous territory when you start setting targets. I mean, for one reason or another, already highlighted. If you miss that target, then it's just fodder basically for the opposition. I think if there should be a reasonable target set by the local authorities and then also by central government to say that you have to achieve a minimum of, say, 10,000 houses in certain high demand areas. Particularly in the London area, I know that those houses will get occupied very quickly, and there is identified land already where these can be built. I think where planning rules can be amended, that's great, but then also you've got to think about in terms of conservation areas, it just gets into a whole different other set of regulations. But yeah, I'd say if there's like certain targeted areas where you know that you can get this housing done quickly and affordably, that should be prioritized above other areas.
Yeah. And
I
also,
think target.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think targets are very difficult, right? And they can be quite dangerous, really, because it's been pointed out. I mean, we had a situation in Epsom and Newell where the officers of the council wanted to build homes on greenbelt land, so sacrificing greenbelt land, with green open spaces, and with targets, with to try and satisfy their targets for building homes. Actually, the homes they wanted to build were not really appropriate. They were not affordable by first time buyers, or at least not most first time buyers anyway. And the other thing about the system at the moment is that it incentivizes officers almost to go for the greenbelt land because it's actually easier. There's plenty where we are. There's plenty of brownfield sites. There are plenty of alternatives, but those alternatives are slightly more complex, but perfectly doable. So officers councils will often take the easy way out, which is to go for greenbelt land. And the other thing is, they can often do the Lib Dem trick, and that is, they say on their literature they're there for protecting the green belt, but what they actually do in practice is they just reclassify the land. They just say it's needed, so we can just reclassify it, so it's not technically green belt anymore, and that's how they manage to so-called fulfill their promises to protect the green belt. But that's how it goes.
Gosh, yes, and that reminds me of Labour's policy what they've announced. They said that councils would be required to prioritise building on brownfield sites and poor quality areas in the green belt. They call it now grey belt. What's your view on that? Do you think that councils can now just create these grey belts, you know, like consider what is a green belt as a grey belt?
I don't think so.
The green belt.
No, I wouldn't think so. I think that this goes into a whole thing about conservation and being eco-friendly. I know we're now in the time of net zero where we're all trying to be a little bit more climate friendly. I think it gets into dangerous territory. At which point is it a grey belt? Which point is it a green belt? And then it goes into a whole thing about if there are endangered species there. And I know this was an issue in a certain in a place whereby people were told they had to stop building because there was a certain kind of endangered species nesting in the area.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, yeah, that green belt should remain green belt. There shouldn't be any sort of
grey areas.
Grey areas, yes, exactly. Grey areas. Very pun intended. Yeah, so I think there shouldn't be any sort of grey areas on this, and that green belt should remain green belt, because there'll always be objections from people, and that will just delay house building further.
Well, it depends on what sort of green belt land you know you're talking about. I mean there's some green belt land that you might be quite happy. It really does come down to a local decision. It's got to be decided locally rather than imposed from the top. Yeah, you've got to distinguish between a green belt that is, you know, good, you know, open spaces, and you know, but between that and but there are some types of green belt land that, you know, are just scrubby bits of land that, you know, could be developed. I mean, there is a proposal locally to actually develop a sports field on greenbelt land. Now, technically, that would be building on greenbelt land, but I think most people would find that, you know, that use of it totally acceptable. It's just that basically the original idea of greenbelt land is just so that we wouldn't be totally concreted over. Really, that was the original intention.
Mm-hmm.
So my understanding of the grey belt is a place that already has buildings, like, you know, car parks that are not being used. And I think personally I'm a huge fan of that approach, because obviously the green belt has been set aside for environmental reasons, but that regeneration can turn buildings that are not being used well into residential areas. What do you think about that?
I would say that's more of a brownfield area, where there's
Is it not the
derelict
same
buildings. No, brownfield is essentially areas that originally had some sort of buildings.
Right.
Greenfield, I believe, is areas that are maybe designated for pasture or wildlife.
No, grey. Did you not say grey?
Areas in the green belt dot grey belt. So poor quality areas in the green belt are now being called grey belt by the Labour Party. So that's part of their policy to introduce this grey areas.
I think the question is, who gets to classify this?
I was just about to say,
who decides whether it's grey belt or green belt? I mean, I mean, I get it that, you know, we can't say that every bit of green belt is absolutely sacrosanct and we can't touch it.
Yeah.
You know, that's absurd. But also what we don't want is somebody in Whitehall deciding in our local area, well, that bit's grey belt, which is all fair game for developers, and that, well, you can have that bit of green belt if you like. I think it's got to come down to a local decision in the end.
Agree. And I think it was our government that gave communities more say, to have more say in terms of planning and building of homes.
Well, what we've got to do is we've got to incentivize communities to actually want more development, want a good quality development in their area. That very often the interests of developers and residents are often pitched against each other. So, but if you could have a system whereby you could benefit the rest of the community by the development, if you could find a way to do that, that's surely got to be the way forward.
Yes, and also it's important to consider infrastructure around the house building, because we can build however many great beautiful homes, but what we faced in Newham in Stratford in London when we were living there for a bit is it turned into a massively overcrowded area in just a span of a couple of years. No schools, no shops, nothing. It was still catching up, and there were lots and lots of blocks of flats rising, but people queuing in shops trying to get something simple as food and things like that. So it's making sure that the balance is right between, yes, we need more houses, equally we need something that goes with these houses as well.
Absolutely, and I think it was the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act that provided for developers to contribute towards improving the infrastructure and to ensure that we have the proper infrastructure. Now, interestingly enough, I think it's the Reform Party that wants to reassess the developers' contribution. I think it's a Section 106 contribution, isn't it? And they want to reassess that, and I think that's a danger. For example, we have a village near where I live in Deepcard. The plan was to build about 2,500 homes. Lots of homes have been built. There isn't a single GP practice in Deepcard. They have to use the GP practice in the nearby village in Frimley Green, and that has put pressure on that GP practice. So previously I could book an appointment easily. Now it's a bit more difficult. And also in terms of having access to shops, there's only, I think, one supermarket in the whole village, and no kind of like amenities around, and there's a community centre. So really, we need to ensure that any newly developed areas have got the right infrastructure. But I think the danger is that the Reform Party, I think, wants to reassess that and maybe get rid of it. They don't say they want to get rid of it, but they say reassess, which I think is a danger.
Yeah, I think what concerns me about that is developers are kind of sidestepping the Section 106 agreement in place of infrastructure, or the 30% affordable homes in place of infrastructure. And what we've had here is we've had several huge strategic sites that have been delivered. One of them, I think, was only 8% affordable homes because the developer built a road instead. And the new local plan, what the Labour and Liberal coalition are now suggesting is that they're going to use Section 106 in SIL money to deliver their bus first strategy. So they want to cut out any kind of cars or any kind of vehicle going into the city. So really what they're doing is they're imposing a ULEZ kind of scheme where people will have to pay if they want to go into the city centre, and they're closing all city centre car parks and they're opening up lots of park and rides. Now, I have no issue with park and rides, and I happen to think they're a really good idea, but I, being a Conservative, believe that people have the right to choose. And the Section 106 in SIL, I think it should be reassessed, but only to give it more stringent guidelines in what it can be used for, because at the moment being used for for bus services, while that's great, it's not sustainable, and it's not benefiting that development in terms of resourcing that they would need, like doctors, dentists, shops, and things like that. So that would be my opinion on that. I don't know how others feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Like we had a similar thing when Labour, Lib Dem, and Independent coalition locally in the council were in power. Well, they're now back again, but hey, they were planning to impose something similar to the policy that you were describing, block people moving between the areas and pay the charges to move from within however many meters around your home to somewhere else, and even more so to get into the city centre, which is great in theory if you had gorgeous public transport like London does, but Southend has a bus that may not turn up in 15, 20 minute, 30 minute, or ever sometimes. Like how would people get into the town centre, like walk, or what would they do then?
I also agree that we, as Conservatives, want people to have a choice of using a bus, public transport, or using their cars. And hopefully by investing in the infrastructure for future electric cars, want to have more investment in that industry, have more green cars and green transport, rather than forcing people one way or the other. So yeah, I'm completely in agreement with you, Louise.
Well, the infrastructure point, I'm sure it's been coming up on the doors, with you just as much as it is with us. Yeah, I mean, we've got this. It's something we really do have to address, because it's often the main objection to a new development. If there's a new development going up in our area, this is the first question people ask. What about GP services? What about bus services? What about general infrastructure? Which is it's a very fair point. And developers, are going to have to contribute to providing the necessary infrastructure, because otherwise it's just going to make the whole thing very unattractive to existing residents.
Yeah, you do need the amenities when you have this huge developments. Otherwise, we get also the not in my backyard, and that is just a pushback, because people are afraid of so many things, and including the fact that they might not have access to things that they need.
I think I'd like to see changes in the national planning policy framework, because at the moment you can't reject a development on the grounds of congestion. So where I am at the moment, it's obviously we've got a huge city centre, but we've also got a huge coast at Whitstable, but we've got lots of rural areas that are served with one road. And the previous local plan built up one huge portion of the rural area, which has caused congestion on one side of the city. And now the new council are proposing to build up on the other side, which again has one road, and they're not intending to increase any road networks at all to accommodate this. Now, had the national policy framework had a policy in it where you could reject huge developments on the grounds of congestion, I think that we would see a lot less of building in the countryside. I think that we should be bringing in policies where we're building up metropolitan areas and regenerating cities rather than building in the country. Personally, I'm really opposed to building on agricultural land. And we should be using that land for farming and for food sourcing. But I mean, those are just my feelings. But I think sort of going forward, we should be looking at changes that we could make in the NPPF.
can we explain what NPPF?
National Planning Policy Framework.
National Plan. Yes. Thanks for that. I think that's an excellent point. Anyone else on that? Great. Okay. So infrastructure is something that we all agree is important, should be priority. And as you said, you know, areas of congestion, if we build in rural areas, we increase congestion. That's actually not an environmentally friendly policy. So various parties that do say that they care about environment, if they want to build more and more and more, then by creating congestion, not having the right infrastructure, especially for transport, they're actually going to damage perhaps the environment and the air that we breathe and our health as well. And that would have an impact on the NHS. So it's all a vicious circle, and we need to be really mindful of that. I know that the Conservative government or the Conservative Party for this election has pledged to build 1 million homes over 5 years.
Yep.
I think it's Labour that wants to build 1.5 million homes over 5 years. Whether they would be able, what do you think? Do you think they would be able to deliver that? Because they need to relax planning permissions. And then we talked about congestion and infrastructure. If that's not going to be delivered, is that really feasible?
They won't be able to do it.
I don't believe they'll be able to do it, but they have really no qualms about building on greenbelt land, as we know. You know, then they're no friend of the rural communities whatsoever. So I think they will try and push through laws to sort of get rid of a lot of these protections over the environment. And then in return, they'll do it under the guise of we are trying to ensure that there are more affordable houses being built, which is quite dangerous, actually, because we know they are capable of doing these things. But yeah, I agree also with they have to make sure that the infrastructure is in place. Now, I know from a social care point of view, I work in adult social care. So I know that currently this Conservative government is trying to build something called integrated care boards, so that they are trying to make sure that when people, particularly elderly people, are discharged from hospital, they will go into a care facility or have domiciliary carers close to them, but then they'll also have a GP surgery and all the sort of health hubs near to them, to sort of make sure that people don't end up in hospital. Now, if they build, a Labour government comes and builds more and more housing, how will they then contend to make sure that there's enough, as you know, more as enough GPs, enough district nurses, enough of these health hubs around as well? So it's going to be very difficult for them to do, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other comments on that? And the interesting part is that I tried to find what the Liberal Democrats' policy on this is and what are they housing targets, and all I could find was building at least 150,000 new council and social homes a year, and giving local authorities the power to end the right to buy in the areas, and requiring them to have a landlord licensing scheme. Now, first of all, they don't seem to have a target like we do in terms of 1 million homes for everybody. It's just social housing. They're focusing on that. And they also want to take away people's right to buy the social homes that they live in. If I live in an apartment or in a social home, social housing flat for like 15 years, currently I would have the right to buy that if I find a job and I want to stay in my home, but they want to take away that right from me. And how would that affect communities? How would that affect my individual liberty in terms of my choices for life? What's your view on that?
Can I just sort of come in on that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely disgusting. I think when we started, I said that one of the best Conservative policies were the right to buy, and I would absolutely stand by that. And I have seen lots of council tenants buy their council houses. They've got themselves into a better place. They've worked hard to achieve something. Sort of from my point of view, it's always on my mind what would happen to my family if anything should happen to me. So being a council tenant, you are, if you're in a secure tenancy, you're obviously the tenant, and if something happens to you, then what happens to your family at that point? So that's another reason to look for something more secure, because then your family are secure as well. So I mean, there is an argument to be made, and many people do, that with people buying council houses, it then takes reduces the availability. So there is that argument to it. But in terms of working to own something that's yours to better yourself, I can't think of a better policy than that. And I think that the Liberals are really playing with fire in this one.
I think they do. And in terms of, the problem and the issue that you raised, that if we buy the social housing, for example, a flat, which, for example, I live in based on the social housing scheme, there wouldn't be adequate social housing available for others, but there can be other policies like build more social housing properties, right? For every home that is purchased, one home can be built. So those kind of policies would be better than taking away the right to buy from people.
And just to sort of come in there, I actually saw something on the news this morning. I don't know if it was just in London in the southeast, but there was a news article about council housing in London. And I mean, I don't know how true this is, but there were several hundred vacant council properties, some of which had been emptied because the building was going to be demolished and the council would run out of money, couldn't do anything with it, so it just stayed there. But in terms of things like that, if we've got all of this housing that's sitting there vacant, why are we not helping local authorities to do something and regenerate those, rather than creating policies to build more? Why are we not helping councils to look after the assets that they have?
That's an excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to come in on that. Actually, yes, that's in Lambeth Council, which is a surprise Labour council. Yeah, so basically, yeah, I agree with you. It should be the housing stock that's there. It should be redeveloped such that it's available then for council tenants to have. I think that's a very good policy idea. I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of other empty properties throughout the country that could benefit, but it's then also identifying these properties. So I think that should be a policy that each council should do an audit to see where their empty properties are, and if they are currently not available to be rented out, they should be sort of audited to say what needs to be done, and those should be fast-tracked.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to come in on something that was mentioned also, that you mentioned out here about Lib Dem proposing more licensing schemes for landlords as well. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's great to get on the property ladder for the young families and younger generation. Equally, you can't do so in your earlier years, and you need to have a place to rent as well. But by putting more licensing schemes in place, which have already proven themselves not to quite work in multiple areas where they haven't reduced antisocial as much as expected, and equally, it has harmed local responsible landlords, and the ones that are responsible just ignored the scheme altogether and didn't even bother registering for those. So by introducing more of these things, people will just sell off these good quality rental homes for even younger generation than those that can step onto the property ladder, and alienate the whole markets from these sort of areas. And also, I think it kind of makes not much sense in light with the rental reform slowly doing its rounds through Lords now, I think, but it's kind of paused now. But if we're gonna get a single portal for police and landlords for all the registration and everything, why on earth would you want another licensing bureaucracy on top of that existing scheme, just to give councils something to do while they can do something better and something more useful with their time?
Oh, entirely agree. Does anyone else want to come on to that? If not, on the renters reform that you mentioned, I think that's a interesting legislation that Michael Gove introduced. It's great for those who want to rent properties, protects them, we know, and it also protects landlords as well in terms of dealing with kind of like bad tenants, let's say, difficult tenants, right? But the Reform Party wants to get rid of it. They say the current legislation is enough. We don't need further legislation on that. What's your view? Do you think we should get rid of the Renters Reform Bill or keep it? Because I think it's a very novel idea to protect both tenants and landlords. Do you think we should get rid of it or keep it?
I can probably try and begin a comment on that. I think considering that so many conversations have been had to introduce this policy over the years, it's been a cry for policy, and I think it would, so many people wanted it realized for better protection for either sides, that I think completely scrapping it would just be going back to ground zero, back to that drawing board of, okay, how are we going to improve the area then in that case. Equally, I think some of the things that the policy included before they started communications with local landlords and landlords nationally, and the NLRA, the Association of Landlords Community as well, it would have worked for the tenants and would have improved their side of things, but it would have harmed the landlords. Like, for example, if you can no longer evict anyone through Section 21, and if you need to wait through the court system for, say, a year to get your paperwork through, even now, what would happen if all of these people who are using Section 21 all of a sudden queue up in the court? And the tenant stops paying you, and you spend 5 years trying to get rid of them, where to give that home to someone who's ready to contribute towards allowing it. So there was lots of things that were tweaked, luckily, towards the end of the development of that policy, and it is such a shame not to see it through, because I know one of the things that Labour said, that they had a pledge that within the first 100 days of them being in power, they would push the policy through without the court reform. They would just let it go through as is, and like, be it, we're going to protect the tenants, who cares, the landlord's going to make the money anyways. So that's just would have just harmed the whole market and backfired and harmed the tenants themselves, because the rents would go up. There will be no affordable houses to rent and flats to rent after all.
Yes, and there might be repossession proceedings for landlords who wouldn't be able to afford paying the mortgages if the tenants aren't paying. And that's a very interesting point, because if reform is pledging that they want to get rid of it, and landlords actually vote reform, Labour is probably going to get into power. And then Labour's policy is entirely against landlords, as you mentioned and highlight. So actually landlords are going to lose out if they vote reform. So they're better off keeping the Conservative Party in power to ensure that it's a fair deal for them.
I think where I sit on this subject with the renters reform is, I think I see the argument from both sides, and I think that we need something that's equitable for all. My father was in rented accommodation when he came out of the Marines, and his landlord literally just served him with an eviction notice because he wanted to sell the property. So my dad had to then find somewhere else, which was obviously not his fault, and he hadn't done anything wrong. So obviously it put him in a situation where he had no home. But at the same time, when I was a councillor, I was contacted by a landlord who couldn't get a tenant out of their house, and they were in significant financial hardship because the tenant wasn't paying rent. And the thought of having to go to court and paying, you know, to take them to court to get them out, and then waiting the 26 weeks, is that right? Waiting the 26 weeks and all of that with no money coming in. So I kind of see it from both sides, and I think that with this bill it needs to be something that's equitable on both sides. But I think landlords having to take tenants to court, I think, is probably going to hit the landlords. But I think that tenants, particularly families, they need to have that level of security and know that somebody is not just going to turf them out onto the street. So it's a difficult one for this, but it needs to be, I think, sensitive to both sides.
Absolutely. Especially in a climate where more and more people have to rent, perhaps, because the reality is there are not enough affordable homes out there. So you get a lot of people who have to rent. Yes.
It's difficult, really, because I guess the more you try to regulate the market, and if tenants have got more and more protections, then of course it makes property investment and being a landlord so much less attractive, as I think, you know, as you pointed out. So it's a difficult one. One of our councillors, actually, one of our independent councillors, stood up and said, perhaps there ought to be different categories of rented property. So perhaps we should bring back the concept of of lodgings. So you know, somebody can rent a room out in their house, you know, without having to give lots of protections to tenants. When the rules came in that they had to give all these protections and so on, well, of course that meant, well, people just didn't want to rent out their spaces. So you might actually, with a bit less regulation, you might actually increase the availability of rented property. I don't know.
Yes, I've acted for both landlords and tenants in my profession as a solicitor, and those were the days that I was training as a lawyer. And I do remember landlords really struggling with tenants who weren't paying their rent. I mean, there were ways to take them to the court and through the court procedures, but they had difficulty. Equally, I think tenants, as Louise pointed out, when they don't have enough protection, that when that security is in there, we know how problematic that can be, especially if a landlord just decides to evict them, they become homeless, and we know that local authorities have problem with housing stocks. And so you may have families or disabled people without access to homes that are suitable for them. So it's a very tricky area. Yeah, I know, less regulation, more probably possibility of having more rental accommodation, but at the same time, less protection for tenants in an environment where local authorities don't have enough council or social housing homes. It can be also tricky.
Yeah. But then to add to that point, equally, I wonder what sort of landlord would look at their rental house or rental flat and think, well, I've got these beautiful tenants there, they're paying my rent every month, they're taking care of the property, not growing like drugs or anything. How about I just chuck them out on the street? Like, what sort of landlord would wake up one day to that kind of thought? The people who buy these places, they buy it for their pensions, for their like regular peace of mind and kind of retirement income quite often. I wouldn't imagine that they would be evicting people just for the fun of it, really. Like, why would they?
Yes, sure. And Gloria, thank you so much for your message as well. Thank you for being with us. I know that you have to go shortly, but do you want to say anything before you go?
I think we definitely need to think about housing. Your brief was also around helping young people. I think in that light, because I think we are failing them. We know how difficult it is to buy a house, and we need to think way in advance about policies that will help them, so we don't lose their vote. But it is also on us to help young people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks all. See you soon.
See you next week. Yes. So on that point, in terms of building more homes, if I can move away from rental accommodation into more housing, what I noted that in London, for example, in Brentford, in Acton, lots of flats have been built. You know, Acton Gardens now looks really beautiful. South Acton was transformed. And it's thanks to the legislation the Conservative Party's introduced in terms of building more homes, but also beautiful homes, beautiful communities, investing in the infrastructure. It now looks great. However, flat prices are still up. So if you want to buy a 2-bed flat in Acton, it's about £550,000. So a young person or a young professional person, for example, let's say, who works for a bank and earns around 50K, still isn't able to buy a flat in Acton or Ealing, right? They have to either move away or buy a share of freehold or do something else, or maybe buy something with a partner, or if they don't have a partner, with a friend. So still, we're not delivering for them. Now, how do you think we can ensure more affordable homes are on the market? So we build more, but more affordable homes, so that they are at a rate that a young person with a salary of 40, 50, sometimes 35, could still buy their home where they live. Do we do that through tax reduction? Do we do that through other incentives for developers? Should local authorities, for example, build more affordable homes and provide that, or should communities build more for themselves and then place those properties on the market? How do you think we can ensure that more affordable homes are on the market? And should we think about that at all? Should we just leave it as it is?
I mean, the thing is, as Conservatives, we believe in the free market principle. So, you know, any sort of over-regulation may crash the housing market, which is not going to go down with a lot of homeowners. I know a lot of people who, you know, bought their houses 20, 30 years ago. They've increased in property, you know, it's gone up by like considerable amount, especially in London. And, you know, they wouldn't be too happy having an affordable housing block just down the road. It would lower the price of their property. I mean, I know this in my local town. They were planning on demolishing some shops and building affordable housing. And there were about 15,000 people who signed a petition against it. So it did not go down well at all. And they actually had to cancel the plans in the end. So I think it's, depending on the area, you know, it needs to be community-based. There needs to be a community consultation on it. And it needs to be like, as you said, in Acton and Ealing area. In those sort of areas where there should be regeneration, I think, yes, councils and local government should say that, you know, this is what we've assigned. These areas will be affordable housing. And, you know, people can be consulted on that. Because it's closer to London than where I am, I think it would be a good thing. But if you go out towards maybe Hillingdon areas, I know that people are in more leafy green suburbs. People are not happy about having affordable housing. And, you know, these are like very, very blue areas as well. So they're not happy about having affordable housing. So I think in certain parts, definitely in London, people there should be affordable housing. I think one of the plans that's come out today about having no stamp duty up to 425,000 is very good, but
yeah,
there are no places in London that have 425,000 pounds. So as I said earlier, I think it needs to be means tested, and I think it needs to be, you know, they need to look at each area regionally and see that, okay, the average price is the basic for a 3-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom flat is this much. And it has to be that, okay, we will give you a percentage off stamp duty up to 65, 75% off for a certain period of time. Not keep it forever, but just up to a certain point whereby, you know, things get better about affordable housing, and then have it reviewed.
I think we need to sorry, have you finished? I didn't want to jump in. Have you finished?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
I think we need to remove the stigma around affordable housing, because affordable housing isn't necessarily social housing. I know that social housing can bring issues, but what I've found is when you have a proper mix of housing, so you have developments with larger homes and then the affordable homes, and it's mixed together rather than having one huge section that's affordable, and having lots of people with potentially let's say difficulties, and I include myself in that because I'm in housing. But if you have them dotted around, it brings much more of a community feel. But I absolutely take what you say. If somebody's in a really nice area, the last thing they want is affordable or social housing development behind them that could bring them potential issues with antisocial behaviour and things like that. But I do think there's a lot of stigma around social housing and affordable housing, that people assume that something horrendous is going to happen if you have a social housing tenant next door, when that's not the case. But I would like to see more affordable homes delivered for people. How we go about that, I'm not sure. Sometimes it feels really pie in the sky kind of thing that we're talking about. It's an idea that we'll never achieve, which is really sad. But my oldest daughter is in rented accommodation with my granddaughter. There is no way she'll be able to buy a home, not for many, many years. My younger daughter moved back home with us after she left university because there was just no way she could afford it on her own. So, you know, we need to be, we do need to be looking at this, because, you know, my 23-year-old daughter doesn't want to be living at home with her parents. She wants to be independent and she wants to be out there. And I think that we should be absolutely supporting that. And, you know, as Conservatives, and certainly myself, I do support people being self-sufficient. And if we can find a way to make younger people self-sufficient and independent, then I think that we should be looking at investing in that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
agree.
Of course, the affordable, the term affordable. I mean, what do we consider an affordable house? I mean, in London, it's supposed to be anything. Is it anything under 450,000 or something, isn't it? In London, that was considered affordable. The actual bar for affordable is a lot higher than I think most people appreciate.
No, I agree. I think it should be something that any average working person on a full-time salary would be able to afford, right, and get a mortgage. If someone's salary is on 250 and they've got like 10% deposit, the maximum I think mortgage they can get is around £200,000. And a young person, how can they save? So the first thing, we need to help them with their deposit. And I think the government schemes in terms of, you know, offering deposit schemes. So it was what was the scheme called? Help to Buy scheme, where the government contributed towards the deposit to an extent. That was helpful. Then it's in terms of mortgages, interest rates. So it's the job of the government to ensure the economy is growing well so that the interest rates go down. and I'm glad that at least the government has reduced the inflation to 2.3% as of end of May. So that's a good thing, but we want them to work more on improving the economy so that interest rates go further below. And then the prices of those.
Well, we can't rely on that, though, can we? I mean, the thing is, we got to the stage where we were addicted to incredibly low interest rates for a long time. So the only place they could go was up. So, you know, interest rates should have been. A lot of economists think that interest rates should have been crept up. You know, some time back, and it was, I mean, quite a lot of us, you know, we're quite used to sort of 4 and 5% interest rates. So we have to be careful. You know, again, I think it's an important point. You know, the interest rate fluctuations, market fluctuations, are always going to be a bit of an issue.
Will be, absolutely. So
I
one
was gonna
final
come into
comment.
this and say,
Oh yes, yeah.
sorry, I was going to come in and say that perhaps we need more shared ownership schemes. I think that would be something. I mean, it will keep people's aspirations high. It's quite similar to the right to buy as well. At some point, they will be able to buy their entire property as they save more, and they're able to do so. So I definitely advocate for that, to say that there should be more shared ownership schemes, and I think that would go down a lot better than having the term affordable housing. So, for example, in my area of London, I think if people were to advertise it as a shared ownership scheme, the residents of this area would know that the people who are coming to live in those places would be aspirational people and sort of fit in with the area. That may just be exclusive to my area, that people are like that, but I think you know, it would solve the stigma around affordable housing.
Or maybe we just change the word affordable to something else that we put, you know,
maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know why there should be a stigma around affordable housing, because as we were just saying, affordable housing is not necessarily cheap housing.
I know.
But what I would say to any resident who doesn't think we should be building affordable housing is, who's going to provide all your services? You know, what about employees at the local hospital? You know,
Exactly.
where are they going to live? And that's the problem that we've got in some parts of Surrey, that we need a lot more affordable housing, so that people who are providing useful services, employees in providing services that we all need, can basically afford to live in the area.
Yeah, I was actually.
People want transport services, people want care services. Well, you know, you have to have affordable homes for people to live, to provide the services, to keep the economy going, to keep the local community going. So I think it's very short-sighted not to prioritize on affordable homes.
Yes, yes.
Definitely. I mean, I was just going to say that the new Hillingdon Hospital development that's happening in Hillingdon and Uxbridge, there will be affordable housing for key workers, which I think is a really brilliant idea. I mean, as I said, I work in adult social care, so the people who work for me, they've saved up, they're saving up upwards of £250,000 as a family over the last 5 years. And now in the Northampton area especially, there is affordable housing there, and they're getting mortgages and they are being able to get on the property ladder, and I'm so happy for them that they're able to do so. And it's that thing again, creating aspiration amongst people. So I think, you know, if there is something whereby people can save up and buy something, in the end, it's only going to help the economy further. So yes, I completely agree with you on the key worker and, you know, having some sort of affordable housing there. As you said, Ati, I think, you know, they need to change the name slightly to help people who live in these areas sort of be okay with it. I don't know why, but they seem to think that, you know, affordable housing will get all sorts of ASBO type people coming to this area, which is obviously not true. But, you know, there needs to be some thought on that, I think.
Of course, thank you so much. Now I'm going to shortly wrap this up, and thank you everyone for your contributions, but I'm going to ask you, each one of you, to conclude with a short statement of about a minute saying why you think the Conservative Party has delivered, why you think the Conservative Party would be the best party to deliver on more homes for the younger population, younger families and younger professionals. Who wants to go first? Louise.
I'll go first. Okay. How I think we've delivered. I think we've continued to deliver with the right to buy. I think how we have helped younger people get on the property ladder is with some shared ownership schemes. I do think that there's things that we could do. As I said before, I don't think that Labour are going to deliver the 1.5 million homes that they've pledged to. So I think that it's going to just, I think it will be totally undeliverable. So I think that we have our heads screwed on. I think we're looking at the right targets. I think we need to be using proper census data though, rather than 2014 data. It's really hard because you've put me on the spot at the end of a really busy day. But I would say that we continue to support people with the right to buy, particularly in social housing. I think we've done well with the 30% on new developments, but I think we need more stringent rules in holding developers to account with those. Yeah, sorry, I can't help that. That's all I have. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Who's next?
I can have a go. I think Conservatives have delivered for the housing area. One, like Louise mentioned, through right to buy, shared ownership, help to buy schemes, all of the different variations that help people to get on the property ladder. Lifetime ISAs, we've used it ourselves. We wouldn't have been able to afford the deposit because it's a constant chasing game with inflation and everything else. And also supporting the taxation regimes so that, like the recent national insurance cuts, they've allowed to put money back into people's pockets, save more to eventually buy their first home quicker. What I think we can still deliver on is that rental reform that was mentioned. I think nowhere on earth Labour can deliver on it properly with thinking about all the different parties involved, because they only think, okay, social tenants or whatever tenants, they're the priority. Everyone else can just die in the industry, which doesn't quite work because it's going to backfire to the actual tenants who rent in these places. And I think with permitted development rights, throughout the years, so many times these little rules were tweaked here and there, which allowed to build more houses, redevelop brownfield properties. And I think with the creativity that Conservatives have been approaching these policies, we can find even more these opportunities of what else can be converted into people's homes throughout the years, which I don't think Labour would ever think about, because they literally think, okay, let's turn some green belt area into grey belt and just build from scratch, which doesn't quite work financially.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that. Stephanie, how would any of you like to chip in?
Yeah, I can go for it. Yeah, so I think we've, as a party, we've put forward quite a few policies to help the housing crisis in this country. Namely, we've committed to reaching a target of 300,000 homes per year by the mid-2020s. We've also put forward plans for social and affordable housing, We put forward 11.5 billion in investment towards affordable housing. We've also supported first-time buyers by putting in schemes like the Help to Buy scheme, the Lifetime ISA, which no other party has ever thought of doing beforehand. We've also put forward the no-fault evictions, which we aim to abolish as well, which I think will give greater confidence to renters as well as landlords in the end, to ensure that there are good landlords going forward. Also, I think we are the party of conservation as well. So not only we have decided to not build on greenbelt land and decide to go for brownfield first policies, which I think is great, to regenerate areas which were previously used as industrial, now can be used as residential. And I think also ensuring that we have infrastructure in place, good infrastructure also. And I think that one of the great ideas we've had is our overseas stamp duty, putting that forward towards tackling homelessness, which also no other party has thought of. So I think going forward, we need to make sure that we tackle this issue of making sure that sort of our generation and younger generation have a chance to buy their homes, not only get on the rent, but also have a chance to buy. We had a great example of the right to buy, and we are the party of that. So we must remember that. And yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Neha. Stephen, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. I'm not going to repeat all the good points that have been made so far, but just to say that I think we've partially delivered on this. I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say this is an area where we need to do much better on as a party, particularly if we look at the age profile of Conservative voters. So we need to be attracting more aspirational younger voters, clearly, and I think this is an area we need to do much better in, and that in terms of giving people the hope and genuine hope and aspiration of owning their own property, which is really important, and that's partly why Margaret Thatcher was so successful. So we need to show people we are the party of aspiration. So just as an additional thought, we really do need to consult on changing the Town and Country Planning Act. I think it's got to be a proper consultation with all the parties and stakeholders involved. We need to get it right. We really do. But also we need to maintain our policy of localism, make sure that planning decisions are still local. But I think there's a lot we could improve on the way we do things, and then there'd be fewer barriers to delivering the properties that we want to see. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And just to conclude, yes, I think it's just the Conservative Party is going to deliver hopefully on promises that they have made, and with reform, we noted that yes, they may vote for the extreme policies proposed or what seems to be beneficial for some, but in fact, if the Conservative voters vote reform, they may get, or they would in fact get, a Labour government whose policies are very different. And we noted that the Labour policies actually aren't going to adequately address the environmental issues and all that have been achieved for both tenants and people who aspire. And the Liberal Democrats, we noted that they don't have actually a target for more homes for people to own. And in fact, their policies are going to risk community, in my view, and individual liberty of people. So in the coming weeks, we are going to talk about other issues: education, family, defence, immigration, and topics that people of, well, those with young families, young professionals relate to, and also other voters across. We will try to sort out our technical issue to go live next week. So if you've got questions, you want to join us, do join us. You can ask questions on Facebook or YouTube, or you can send those in advance to us by email, and that is office@q2conservatives.uk. If you go on our Facebook, all the details would be there. So thank you so much for joining us. I have to thank our amazing panel, all the guest speakers. So thank you for your contributions and your comments, and I hope to see you and other people in the coming weeks.
Yeah. Thank you so much all.
Thank you. Have a good